Hi, my name is Mandy Coakley again, and it's my pleasure to be able to introduce our next speakers for this afternoon. And again, you can look at the bios of both of these people in the guidebook. So we're going to hear from Jackie Fawcett and Martha Alligood, and I think we can get started now.
Good afternoon. Jackie and I are so pleased to be with you and pleased to share some of our recent work. And our topic you can see on the screen, evolution of the language of the science of unitary human beings, recognizing the growth. The objectives of our study were to recognize the importance and vital nature of language in the development of science, to trace the evolution of changes in terminology in the science of unitary human beings, as used by Martha Rogers in her publications from 1970 to 1994, and then to identify definitions for new terminology introduced in the science of unitary human beings by selected contemporary Rogerian scholars. In this presentation, we don't have time to name all those, and so we have selected certain persons to share. Consider the potential research topics that emerge through the process of review of the growth of the language in the science of unitary human beings.
Next slide.
We use the Oxford Dictionary definition of science, which is the systematic study of the structure and behavior of the physical and natural world through observation, experimentation, and the testing of theories against the evidence obtained.
Next
Questions?
slide. Oh.
Go ahead.
Okay, next slide.
The development of language of the science of unitary human beings is a never-ending process. This abstract system has presented for some years ago has continued to gain substance. Concomitantly, early errors have undergone correction. Definitions have been revised for greater clarity and accuracy, and updating of content is going. And I should say that we're indebted to Martha for providing this framework that has helped us enrich not only our own lives, but also our teaching, our development of our own careers and our teaching throughout the years. And I actually had a student that was in the master's program here at East Carolina University. And I taught the first semester I was here, I actually taught a master's level course. So I taught her, and it was an online course. And the day she graduated, the faculty were seated on the platform, and when she came across, she came over and she thanked me because she said she really did not understand what it meant to be a nurse until she had my course. Next slide.
So, John Phillips, in the first issue of Visions, identified what he called pan-dimensional seeds of the birth of Rogers' science of unitary human beings. And those seeds are diverse phenomena in a universe of infinite wholeness, truth and knowledge, the means to create and discover knowledge that gave insight into an understanding of the meaning and purpose of the profession of nursing, innovation, a new way of thinking about the diverse dimensions of humankind, and a new vision of reality. And I think all of those things we've seen in the presentations today and at other conferences. And I'd just like to say that a lot of the rest of our presentation today has been covered in perhaps slightly different ways. In some ways, there's some similarities with Arlene's presentation and some of the presentations today. So we really didn't know what everybody else was doing. And I think the good news is that we're also committed to Rogerian science, that we're all thinking in essentially similar ways. Okay, next slide. So from Roger's own thinking, she progressed from regarding the person as man to unitary man, and then by 1986 into unitary human beings, which it has pretty much stayed with. Next slide. And then we see in 1970, some of the concepts that she identified were energy field, wholeness, openness, pattern and organization, and sentience and thought. And a lot of my own work at the time when I was at NYU and my dissertation, I was thinking about it in terms of pattern and organization. And as you can see, then pattern changed by 1980 and stayed as pattern. And then Martha and I at one point gave a presentation where we thought maybe patterning should be the next word. And I didn't think to put that in these slides. But energy field has stayed the same. Wholeness is pretty much around now. And openness and sentience of thought was left behind by 1980. Next slide. And as we all know, in the 1970 book, the homeodynamic principles were reciprocity, resonancy, helicy, and synchrony. And by 1980, it went to resonancy, helicy, and complementarity. And by 1986, we saw resonancy and helicy staying, but complementarity changed to integrality. And I remember at a book opening for, I think it was the first edition of my conceptual models book, we were in New Orleans, and F.A. Davis had given a party for the book, and Martha was there. And I commented to her that she continually changed words just after I published my book. So that some of the language in the chapter about Martha in the book were already outdated. She just said, well, of course I keep changing. And then she always promised us that she would do another book after the 1970 book. But at one point, I recall that she said that things changed so much that she could never keep up with it. So fortunately, we got lots of very wonderful articles. Okay, next slide. So unidirectionality, in 1970, went to four-dimensional, in 1980 to multi-dimensional, in 1990, and by 1992, we had pan-dimensional. In 1970, we had helicy regarded as probability. By 1990, probability went to unpredictability. Next slide, please. And Roger's idea of pan-dimensional, John Phillips, then evolved into Homo pandimensionalis as the way to identify human beings. And he also identified, as has been mentioned earlier today and yesterday, pan-dimensional awareness and pan-dimensional relative present awareness. I should say here that rather than taking a lot of time today to give more details and definitions, that Martha and I are in the midst of writing a paper that we will submit to Advances in Nursing Science as for the visions section of that journal. Within, I think we should be finished the paper in about a month, and we'll have much more detail in that. Next slide, please. So throughout her writings, Martha referred pretty much to the nursing process, or to what was happening with people as well-being, wellness, illness, and health. And John, by 2019, introduced well-becoming. And I want to ask John, so we can talk about this in our discussion today, is how can we talk about well-being in terms of, do we have levels of well-being, or is well-being just well-being? So if I'm writing like a get well card to somebody, how do I refer to well-being? Do I say, best wishes for increased level of well-being, or the journey of well-being, or what it might be. So I'll appreciate John's input at that time. Next slide.
Or well becoming.
Or well becoming, excuse me.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. John's other major contributions are energy spirit, beauty, human field image, and human field hugs, which I love very much because I enjoy hugging people. Next slide, please. So the nursing process for Rogers was assessment, diagnosis, goal setting, intervention, and evaluation, or at least that was my interpretation of what Martha had written in 1970. And then Barrett in subsequent publications and Richard Cowling introduced health patterning practice method, which if I interpreted it correctly was pattern manifestation, knowing and appraisal assessment, voluntary mutual patterning, and pattern manifestation, knowing and appraisal evaluation. Next slide, please. And one of many, many of Elizabeth Barrett's contributions was, as we've mentioned various times today and in other conferences, powers, knowing, participation, and change. Next slide, please. And then how some of Howard's many contributions are kaleidoscoping in life's turbulence, aging as emergent brilliance, and unitary field pattern portrait methods. And I think Martha's going to take over now.
Yeah, Butcher has developed and published a creative body of work in the science of unitary human beings. An interesting reference to his work that I came across was it's in a Iowa press books, and I really wasn't familiar even with the press books. But anyway, I had no trouble accessing that. And in what seemed like chapter 7, I didn't know exactly, it's under number 7, Unitary Practice Methods, a Science of Unitary Human Beings 2.0, is quite explicit. So someone that's just beginning to understand the science of unitary human beings could really benefit from reading through that and the connection between the framework and in practice. And one of the things that I really meant to say on earlier, but I didn't, was Martha is in Violet's 1986 book on page 3. She has a couple of chapters at the beginning of that book. The development of a science portends the emergence of abstract concepts and a corresponding language of specificity. And she was often very careful about the language. And her chapter 11 in the 1970 book is The Aims of Nursing Science. And it's an excellent reference on language. Interestingly, she talks a good bit about language in that chapter. And so I wanted to mention those. And the other thing that I wanted to share, and those of us who knew Martha, I knew Martha quite well, made a trip with her to Tennessee when the first year I was at NYU, and to attend. She was speaking at the Tennessee Nurses Association, and the meeting was in Gatlinburg. And so she invited me to go, and her niece, Catherine, came and brought a group of students. She was teaching in North Carolina at the time, and she brought a group of students. And the students were, there just wasn't room to bring all those students in for Martha's presentation. And she said, don't worry, we'll do something special. So she invited all those students. Actually, it ended up not in her corn pone cottage, but up at her sister's, up at Laura's cottage. and we all gathered, and it was in the fall, and we had donuts and cider, and students would ask Martha questions, and she would say, "You just talk to Martha." Now I've got to tell you, this is when I'd been there. I'd had the Science of Unitary Man, which became Human Beings, but it was Man in the summer of '79 when I had that course. And so anyway, some of you probably know Catherine, and she eventually came and went through NYU. And so I have rich memories of my travel. Now, I also remember John asked me if my insurance was paid up because I was going to ride with Martha. But anyway, those were rich memories with her. The other thing that I wanted to share is she was very explicit about the development of scientific knowledge, and this is actually a quote, evolves out of general language usage. And the reason I want to mention that is our discussion about instruments has been interesting. We did not have instruments, and therefore we were trying to capture what were at that time suggested manifestations of the pattern and process, the mutual process. And so Martha had, many of you, if you went to her office, and you would know that she had a unabridged dictionary. And the unabridged dictionary stood on a pedestal that's a piece of furniture that to me is a fern stand, I believe is what they're called. But anyway, if you went to meet with her, and I did do independent study with Martha because they were no longer going to let her be chair of dissertations. So she had really retired, but she went to the office every day, and I don't know if she got paid or not. She had been retired, and her life was just there at the school. So anyway, when I went to talk to her about that, perhaps what she was talking about, and this was before integrality, but I was talking about the process of the person-environment process and like a feeling attribute of that. And I said, you know, are you saying? And all I was doing was going through a thesaurus to find different terms that might describe. Anyway, so I asked her if she was saying that those were integral. And I have my notes somewhere that I suggested that to her. But anyway, it was soon after that. Now, I know I can't take credit that she came up with integrality. Somebody else probably said something, or maybe there was even reference to that before. But it just thrilled my heart when I saw soon after that she had changed that to integrality. And so I did develop more research over the years looking at empathy as a manifestation of integrality. And I do believe it is. And so anyway, those are just interesting things. And the day that I talked to her about empathy and why the unabridged dictionary becomes relevant is that, and I think Richard was referring to some of those conversations we would have with Martha about using instruments and developing manifestation terms for those manifestations. But anyway, the day I talked to her about empathy, she said, well, you can't do that. You can't use that. And I used to tell the students while my tears dripped on her office, on her desk, she went to the unabridged dictionary. And she said, because it's just between people, empathy is just between people. And I said, well, Martha, I thought that too. But when I've looked in the literature, it's about interaction with people and things. And this is relevant to what Richard was talking about nature, I think. And so anyway, she looked it up and she said, well, I'll be darned. Yeah, you can use it. So empathy was in my dissertation. And then I continued to study empathy for about 20 years in many different ways, including in Rogers and in King. I did a lot of work in King with empathy. So anyway, excuse me for jumping in there, Jackie.
No, Martha and I talked about our presentation a few days ago, and Martha told me some of these stories, and I think that it's really important that they be shared with everybody. So I'm delighted. So we can have the next slide, please. And this is you, Martha.
Okay, and in Cowling's work, actually, what I would recommend if you're not up to date on Richard's work, he's made many contributions and certainly has published many of those along the way. But the one that he is listed on the slide as 23A, the appreciative praxis. In that, I just read that. That's actually in Advances in Nursing Science. It's the Visions publication. Well, I've got it laying here somewhere. Anyway, I was going to tell you which month, but he actually starts at the beginning and brings you all the way through. It's a detailed article, and I would recommend that. Richard and I went through NYU at the same time, and so I'm very familiar with, we had lots of discussions around mysticism, and so I was familiar with that as he presented. So his emphasis was always practice. We had lots of jokes about our masters, and I felt like in my masters, I got more theory emphasis. In his masters, he was practice, a more practice emphasis in his. And part of that just grew out of our own interests. I have always been interested in the framework of whatever. I always told the doctoral students I was the curriculum person before I became the theory person. So the structure of the curriculum and the structure of a framework in order to make decisions and to think and to understand was very important to me. And he was constantly interested in practice and has developed the theory and very carefully in unitary science, and very major contributions have been made. I looked up this phenomenal concept, attunement, and I really I looked that up. I believe that's not published yet, but maybe submitted somewhere. Anyway, most of what I could find about that the phenomenal conceptual attunement has to do with doing away with the separation of well, I'm sorry, I've lost my idea about that.
Well, perhaps Richard can tell us during the discussion about that.
Yeah.
That was a presentation at the Virtual Nursing Theory Conference.
Maybe it's better not to have notes, as I lose myself on my notes. Anyway, sorry about that. I just don't see it. Oh, no,
We'll go to the next slide then.
yeah. Okay. And the third one that we looked at was Violet. Now, Violet Malinsky is what I would call a servant leader. Violet is one who has developed work all along from her dissertation on, but she's been active in this in the society, the Rogerian Society, in various roles, and she has helped us all, moved us all along. I think Richard made reference to the Explorations book. Oh, I guess I can't do, yeah, there we go. Explorations, the 1986 book, Explorations on Martha Rogers' Science of Unitary Human Beings. And sometimes I think we don't celebrate the importance of that enough, because that book, several of us that had finished, and my dissertation's in there. Richard mentioned that his was, but there's a number, I think, of us in there. And the reason the book is significant is that there were reviews of each person's research, and a critique was done. And those were done by Joyce Fitzpatrick, and also some of them were done by Violet. And if you haven't ever seen a copy of that, I highly recommend that. Again, for the history, I think the development over time has been significant, and you miss something if you don't know some of that history. If you just come into the science now, there's certainly relevance there, but the history enriches that and helps you understand the development over time. And the other thing I was thinking about, and Violet will have to correct us on this if I'm wrong, but I think, Violet, it was either in your work or at the time that you were in school, maybe, that we went to mutual process. And I think before that, it was mutual simultaneous interaction. So we left behind the interaction piece. And I believe I'm right about that. And it was certainly at that time that happened. But I think of all the contributions you've made through Visions, through the foundation, just organizing, and here you are organizing this, being the person having this. So it's just an illustration of what I'm saying. And I just want to say that how much I appreciate all the contributions you've made, and not only in your writing, but also in your service to the organization that we've all benefited from. And I appreciate that.
As do I, certainly. Next slide. So we'd like now to ask for your questions and comments, but Lisa, if you'll advance to the very next slide. So we hope that that's stimulating ideas for future research, and we thank you very much. And then the next slide is what I wanted everybody to see. So this is Martha and me at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, in I think 1998, when Martha had invited me to give presentations to faculty and students, and then there was an endowed lecture that I also gave. And Martha found this article, this photograph, and sent it to me, and I was able to put it into the slides. So I thought you'd like to see us a few years ago.
Yep. When I was at Tennessee, at the University of Tennessee, of course, Martha was thrilled, because Martha grew up in Knoxville, and she was thrilled when I went there. And So one of the things that I learned, I went in 1990s when I joined the faculty there, and I had been a consultant to them on the beginning of their doctoral program. And so when I arrived there, I found out that they had what they were wanting to call a theorist conference, and they had Martha Rogers the year before I came. And so they came to me, some of the faculty and the dean, and Sylvia Hart was dean, who's also an NYU graduate. And Sylvia and the faculty, they said, now, Martha, we want to keep having these every year. And so how should we do that? And I said, well, I think we should take Fawcett's book and the identification of the models, and we should start inviting a different theorist that has developed a model each year. So we did that, and I had the thrill for 10 years of chairing those and making the arrangements and convincing some that were in retirement that if they came, I'd take care of them and do about anything they wanted. And we arranged their stay, and I got to know Callista and Imogene King, and just a number of the, either a theorist came or a person who had studied with the theorist and written a lot, published a lot with them. Well, anyway, when we finished the 7 models, I said to the students, they were always asking me, who's coming next? Who's coming next? They were always excited. And these are doctoral students. And I said, well, who should it be? We did the 7 models. Who should it be? And they said, well, Jackie Fawcett. So that's how Jackie's got invited. And we had a wonderful time. What I would ask the people to do was they presented on practice to the master students. Then they presented on knowledge development to the doctoral students. And then we opened it up, and this picture was taken at the Hilton at the airport in Knoxville. And we opened it up and had a big session where we invited other schools of nursing. And so there would be, several hundred people end up there for that. And Jackie then presented that day too. And she actually has the title of when she did these and the date. I was so impressed that you could pull those up, Jackie. My stuff's not quite that organized. And anyway, I was really fortunate at the University of Tennessee. I taught beginning doctoral students, and we had a number of Rogerian. In fact, the first person I chaired there was a Rogerian study. And that's Kay Boltermeyer, who developed a methodology using photography, and is written up for that, and has done chapters in some of my books. And so anyway, but for 10 years I taught the first 2 semester courses to the doctoral students on knowledge development, nursing science and knowledge development. And so that's been a blessing that I received, and I'm thankful for that. We might have questions. Let's see if we do.
So we can put down the slides now. The rest of them are simply references. So if anybody has questions, and maybe John can answer my question about how I refer to well becoming.
What is the question, Jackie?
How can I refer to well-becoming? Can you have levels of well-becoming, or is well-becoming just well-becoming? So if I'm writing a note like to Leslie Nickel, and I'd like to say, I hope you're progressing, or, like, is it to the next level of well-becoming, or is it just on a journey of well-becoming? Or how would we express that?
Well, well-becoming is an ongoing process.
Okay.
And the ultimate is when you transcend after physical death.
Okay, so.
And you still have well-becoming in the hereafter.
Mhm, 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 mhm.
It's not a static phenomenon.
And it doesn't have levels, because that would be more particulate, I think.
No, it's just the well-becoming of each individual.
Mhm.
And they're not all the same,
Mhm,
Yeah.
because each person has a different pattern.
mhm. Thank you. So other questions, comments?
Well, Howard, let's ask Howard if I'm right about that reference to your press book. Is he there? Maybe he's not. Oh yeah, there he
I
is.
am, yeah. I put the link, Martha, in the chat, so
Oh, okay.
yeah. Thanks for mentioning it.
Yeah.
It's
yeah.
still a work in progress.
Well, I figured because it's 2.0, I said there must be a 3.0, but I couldn't find that.
I'm still doing 2.0.
Well, I found that very interesting and informative, and I think students would enjoy it, looking at that, and it would help kind of anchor them also.
Mhm. The idea of it is it's a wiki. So if you're a member of the wiki, then
Oh, yeah.
yeah. So the idea was for it to be a collaborative process of different people contributing content to each of the different chapters. But I've done most of it.
Getting the light. There we go.
Jackie
I had a
can-
question. Sorry.
Jackie gave all the references to me, that I think the references are still there. So that was a real important contribution. And Violet has been involved too in putting the content in there on the Powers Knowing Participation tool.
Oh, okay. So it was in the wiki. I didn't really understand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Richard.
Yeah, this is something that's been driving me crazy for months and months. And this is, I remember distinctly, and I'm ashamed to tell you guys that I loaned out books through my years, and I realized I don't have a theoretical basis anymore. And I didn't have Violet's book. I bought that. It's very expensive now. Violet, you should be getting money.
Are you kidding? Nothing.
And I thought I found the theoretical basis, and then I got a message saying, sorry, we thought we've had it for you, but we don't. So I've given out my books. I've freely loaned them, and I found 3 books I did not have that are central. Anyway, forget that. But I swear that somewhere I recall Martha having this diagram for the relative presence.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it was showing, I want that so much, because I think it speaks to all this stuff we're talking about, time and movement and everything. And I can't find that anywhere. It was either in the book or does anybody remember that? I don't know if it was a handout.
Oh yeah, I remember. It was like a sheet of paper. I never got it. I never could.
I thought it was in the theoretical basis book, but it had her model of relative present, and and that's, I remember it in my mind, because that's when she talked about there isn't past, present, and future. It's all one. There isn't any movement. It's one. It's always.
It's in the Reel and Roy book. It's in a chapter that she wrote in the Reel and Roy book.
Thank you, Howard.
I think it's there's 3 editions of that book. I think it's in the 2nd edition.
I've probably given that one to somebody. I have a feeling.
Real and Roy.
I remember, yeah, I know that book. I know that book. Thanks, Howard.
Mhm.
Howard has all my notes. He stole them from me too, from NYU. That's true. He did.
Well, the story I heard is that you were throwing them out and he saved them.
They were in the trash can, Richard.
They weren't in the trash can. I was moving and I told you, go clean out my office and you can have anything you want. I don't want any of it. I'm moving on. I'm not, I'm moving on. I'm not there anymore. Take anything you want.
And so I did, and I have them to treasure.
But Richard, can you tell us a little bit about phenomenal conceptual attunement?
Well, that was a paper I presented and I haven't written it up to, but maybe I should. But it's the one some of you might have remembered. It was from the theory conference, I think, in the fall. And what I was talking about that is, and it goes back to what I feel with students jump, the PhD students, I find they jump toward, a research idea and then they try to, and maybe it's not so common, but find a measurement. Find a measurement. If I got a measurement, then I'm home free. And without understanding the phenomenal elements of this concept. So they may be, have this concept construct they want to study, but then they go and find this instrument, and before they know it, they're looking at the items and they don't match. So what I presented in that was this idea of helping students getting attuned to the phenomenal elements or phenomenal aspects of a concept by using music, videos, imagery of the particular, if you think conceptualization is imagining of, then use visual kinds of representations to get you attuned with it before you decide how you're going to move forward in terms of the methodology and so forth. Does that make sense?
Okay, thank you very, very much for everybody for all of your discussion with us. I think just in the half a minute we have left, I think it's instructive for everybody to realize that what we're seeing here is a fair amount of history. John finished his PhD a year or two before me. I finished in '76, and then all the other people you're seeing finished after us. So I was one of the people whose studies were not considered true Rogerian studies, and then other people who are here now were moving toward more truly Rogerian studies. I always felt a little slighted about that, but I understand. And so it is 2:00 and it's time for the next presentation. So
Okay.
thank you very much.
Stories of horror.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Jackie and Martha. Beautiful.
Thank you.